Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever it is, wherever you are, welcome to the Good Values podcast. Now, most of season 2, I've been speaking to illustrators, and I've been very privileged and fortunate to speak to so many experienced artists who are really generous with their time. And this episode is no different from that, except this is not an illustrator. This is a fine art painter who works in a sort of impressionistic style. It's a fantastic application of paint. And I'm very happy to present my conversation with Tim Benson. Would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
My pleasure. Hi everybody. I'm Tim Benson. I'm an oil painter, specialising in portrait paintings. I am the current president of the Royal Institute of Oil Painters, albeit for 10 more days of a 5-year tenure. I'm a member of the Royal Society of Portrait Painters and a member of the New English Art Club. I also lecture and teach at art schools as well.
Fantastic. How would you describe your style of painting?
I suppose if I had to sort of coin a label for what I do, I think it would be sort of modern expressionism, so contemporary expressionism, so very loose painting, oil painting, that's figurative and sort of not realist, but representational painting, I suppose. But it's definitely not realism or photorealism. It's more sort of expressionistic, impressionistic, so loose, thick painting.
But you do have a wonderful sense of light and shadow within the different colours that you use. You manage to heighten the form of the faces, your portraitures. I really enjoy that type of painting, and that's incredibly skillful. Is this something which you excelled at before art school, or was this something that was reinforced in your education?
So I didn't really do any oil painting before art school. I did, bits and bobs of acrylic and, but mainly pencil stuff. And then I went to art school. I didn't actually do a huge amount of painting at art school either, because it wasn't really high on the list of their priorities when I was there. So I was at art school. I did an art foundation course first, back in 1996, where we tried a bit of everything, including painting. So I did a bit there. And then I did the first year of my fine art degree up at Glasgow School of Art in 1998 to 1999. And they were, in their defense, they were still actually interested in painting. So I did some painting there, not a huge amount of oils though. And then I transferred back down to London, which is where I'm from, for family reasons. And I went to an art school, which actually doesn't exist anymore, called the Byam Shore, which was sort of subsumed by Central St Martin's just after I left. And it was very conceptual when I was there. So I didn't actually do a huge amount of painting. I wasn't particularly encouraged to do it. So I wouldn't say I learned my craft at art school. I'd say it was almost sort of, in spite of being at art school, that I just painted. But really, I'd say I'm self-taught. It's what I've been doing in my studio ever since. That's been the sort of, the motivator and the sort of defining the way I work, really, just through trial and error and trying things that excited me, and conversely things that didn't, just to see where I sat with it. But in terms of the sort of the high contrast stuff, it's just the way I see the world. I'm drawn to powerful images, and by association, sort of powerful image making. I'm always looking for form and structure in faces, I suppose, and I'm sort of drawn to sort of strong faces, angular faces, things that aren't necessarily particularly beautiful in the traditional sense.
It's interesting. And also you do a lot of skyscapes as well. Am I right in saying that you've covered that in a lot of beautiful landscape painting?
Yeah, so I actually, when the painting I did at art school was quite heavily sort of landscape influence. It was based on, big skyscapes that I imagined and had reference material from my traveling when I was, during the holidays. I spoffed a lot of my student loan on the airfares and stuff. So, places like Southeast Asia. And so big skies and just wanting monumental canvases with, loads of paint. So really it was, that was the genesis of that. And I've always been interested in landscapes. And I don't differentiate, to be honest, between landscape painting and portrait paintings. Portraits for me, faces are landscapes in their own right. So it's the same palette that I use for any painting, the same set of colours. Doesn't matter whether it's a landscape or a portrait. It's all part of the same stuff. So yeah, it's all the same philosophy, really.
Fantastic. And you mentioned on your website the how you try to discuss with your work certain global issues. Is there anything that you can talk about that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, fundamental to my own practice, is having not just the process of painting, which I do love and is always the driver for me, is actual physically putting paint onto canvas. I find that endlessly fascinating, but having a reason to do it beyond just the process, beyond just the production of an image, having, using what I do as a vehicle for disseminating issues and messages, in the way that the written word can do that with sort of newspaper reporting. So there's sort of element, a reportage style element to what I do. I try to talk about what I consider to be important global issues through the medium of portraiture, and to give people who wouldn't necessarily have a voice an outlet to discuss what it is that is affecting them. So, for example, I went to Sierra Leone during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa back in 2015, and I interviewed and subsequently painted the portraits of 40 people who had either recovered from Ebola, had and recovered from Ebola, or the people that were treating them, to talk about what was happening with them through portraiture. The press had gone into Sierra Leone during the height of the outbreak and reported about Ebola, but what about what happened after the outbreak? What about the sort of social legacy? What about the ostracization that these people had experienced? That was never talked about. That was never reported, and I felt that was something that I could sort of shed a light on. So I did audio interviews, as I said, and then subsequently painted these individuals, and had a big exhibition in London, a fundraising show, and some of the paintings had the original audio interviews with the people next to them. So it was like an audio visual immersive experience for people to actually come and find out what was going on during the Ebola outbreak. So that's the sort of thing that I'm really interested in. And yeah, hopefully I can continue to do that and sort of shed light on various other things that I think are really worth having a good look at.
That's fantastic. How has the pandemic affected your practice?
I would say it's put it on hold in terms of the evolution of my practice. Certainly these sorts of projects that I'm talking about have had to be put on hold for quite obvious reasons, really, not least the lack of accessibility of travel. Collaborating with individuals and charities has been very difficult during the pandemic. So from a practical point of view, it's stalled that part of my practice. But of course, I still paint. I'm still painting whoever I can and landscapes and things like that. I don't want to be static. And actually, in terms of this commercial side of things, the first year of the pandemic actually was extremely good for me in terms of selling paintings, landscapes in particular, because people wanted something something positive in their lives on their wall, on a very practical level. They wanted a bit of good news. And so, and they also weren't spending their money on anything else because there wasn't anything, you couldn't get out, you couldn't spend money. So that was really, that kept me going, definitely. But in terms of actual real creativity and doing the things that I really want to be doing, I wasn't really able to do that. And so now that I'm actually able to sort of turn my attention to that again. And also I've got, had basically 2 kids during the pandemic effectively. So yeah, I've been quite busy.
Yeah. Can you feel that there's still a level of uncertainty in the marketplace currently?
More than ever in my experience. Actually, I would say the marketplace was fairly, in spite of the pandemic, was fairly buoyant. Especially, what I was saying about the first half of the pandemic, and then things calmed down a bit. But yeah, we're living in a perfect storm, aren't we, at the moment? I mean, geopolitically, things are absolutely horrific. The Ukraine war, notwithstanding, cost of living crisis. The general state of play of the world, people are not spending money. So in the same way, now perhaps the very, very, quote unquote, the top end of the market, where we're dealing with exceptionally well-off people that aren't really affected by this, maybe that's still fine. But the area of the market that I occupy, which is what I call the sort of the middle, financially the middle part of the market, is definitely adversely affected. And I think that right now, more than ever, this year in particular, since the turn of the year, things have been very, very tough in terms of the sales. But I think there are finally slight signs of recovery, slight signs of movement. But, I don't want to sort of tempt fate with that.
No. Well, I was thinking it must change how you navigate your work practices through not only practicalities of sourcing models or kind of plein air, or however it is that you source your reference, but also your headspace must be different with the current climate and the different challenges that we face. And how have you found how have you found that for the last year at least?
I think that I would divide that between 2022 and 2023. In all honesty, 2022, in terms of just sales of paintings, bits of commissions, that sort of stuff, was actually okay. Things weren't flying off the walls by any means, but it was fine. It's as we've entered into 2023 that the bottom of the market has just fallen away, quite literally overnight, from 2022 to 2023. And I think that there was a bit of a delayed trickle effect from, the cost of living crisis coming in to actually that hitting the art market, and some fairly interesting governmental decisions about budgets, shall we say, mini budgets back in August, September. And then the reality of that kicking in with the art market by January, suddenly it fell away. And as a result, we've had to hustle more. There's no doubt about it. Increased posts on social media, more landscape work, I suppose, because it's eminently, by definition, I suppose, more commercial. But yeah, no, it's been really, really hard. But in terms of headspace, yeah, it's occupied an enormous amount of headspace, because I'm, thinking, well, where's the next bit of money coming from? It's more hand to mouth than it's ever been. And that, I think, adversely affects the purity of your creative process, because it's more pragmatic. You're being more practical. You have to be. But as I said, I think that things are beginning to shift, and there are signs of life there, and I'm able to sort of see the next steps in terms of the creative side of things now, where I wasn't 2 months ago.
I'm curious, because I had a painting tutor in university myself who was from the Glasgow School of Art, and he told us about a process of painting where he told the story of someone who is rushing out to work and leaves a note for the milkman, and has to quickly write a note and leave it. And then the difference between that and a few days later, when they're not rushing out and they leave a note for the milkman, and the difference in the penmanship and how that could affect your brushstrokes. And basically he was trying to get us to do something very quickly on the canvas, and then let it dry, and then come back with more time and care and attention to how we applied the paint. Does that factor in at all? Do you feel your actual your application of paint, has that changed depending on the intensity that you feel you're dealing with certain pressures, whether it's exhibition or whether it's geopolitical considerations that can sometimes be anxiety inducing. Does that have an effect at all?
It's an interesting analogy. And I'm not sure, did it in any way deliver the milkman's, did it affect the milkman's delivery? It's just wondering, whether he left, silver top by mistake, I don't know. But listen, I always try to bring a requisite amount of intensity into my studio whenever I go in, irrespective of what it is that I'm painting, or indeed when I'm painting. For me, it's like I try to reset to zero, and I come in and sort of effectively G myself up, and then come into the studio and I work with a degree of urgency. I always have. I feel that that's how I work at my most intense, and it requires that degree of intensity to get the sort of painting that I want, to come off the brush. I wouldn't say that I can particularly gauge whether or not the external circumstances have particularly changed that language. I don't know. Okay. And I may look back in a few years, look at the body of work that I produced in this time period and say, well, actually, yeah, clearly that's a response. But at the moment, I would say it would be nuanced, and I wouldn't necessarily be able to sort of gauge that. Other people might be able to. They may have a more of an overview. It's amazing what other people can say, and you can see in what you do that you can't see yourself.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that I do, when I'm really angry, that very often channels into, I think, some of my best work. There's a sort of a real emotive response to the circumstance that I'm experiencing. For example, a few years ago, I received some bad news about a competition that I entered. Okay, didn't get into this particular thing. Was really, 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 really pissed off about it because it was the painting that I was very, very pleased with, and I really was, between you and me and everybody else, actually, for that matter, I was really pissed off because I thought, this should be in that show. Anyway, it wasn't. And in the past, that would have really sort of stopped me from working. It would have really got under my skin to the point that I was not able to work. It would have choked me up. But I actually made a conscious decision that day. It's like, I'm going to use this, and I'm going to channel that negativity, that negative energy, into something meaningful. And I went into the studio and I painted in anger, real anger. And I then produced what I felt was one of the most significant pieces of my career. And then that went on to win, a couple of prizes. And so I think that in that sense, it did potentially change the language of my work. But that was a specific example. General environmental circumstances, yeah, it probably does, but nothing that I could be that obvious. There's always a baseline of urgency, stroke anger, stroke motivation. I'm not, people say, oh, you're a painter, that must be really lovely, must be really relaxing. I'm always, mildly amused by that, because it's quite the opposite. When I go in, it's war. I'm geeing myself up beforehand. I go in like, on an absolute mission, basically.
Yeah. I can relate to that. I've said to someone it's less meditative and more an ordeal when I go through the painting process to try and achieve something.
Yeah, very, very definitely not meditative from my end.
I was thinking as well that this being my first year of professional practice outside of school, I've had the experience of struggling to communicate with galleries, and you've raised this issue yourself on Instagram. I don't know if other social media as well, and I've seen the response that you've had on Instagram, and it's been, very welcome discussion to open up. And is there anything that you'd like to discuss about that? Because that's something which I think some people might not be aware of. Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, it's a minefield, honestly, Simon. It really is. I think it's important to understand that the way in which artists sell work and get noticed or seen is changing. Okay, it used to be that the traditional path to artistic success, and I use that term loosely, was, through the gallery system. A gallery would pick you up and show your work, and that was a benchmark of your quality, as it were, as an artist. And I'm using all of these terms with parenthesis, because it's very, very subjective. Obviously now, with social media and the ability to sell work directly through the internet, the way that artists operate is changing. And I think that the pandemic has been, that was happening already, but I think the pandemic has been a catalyst for that. Galleries weren't open. How are you going to make a living? So artists improvise. So I think that the necessity to have your work shown in galleries from a financial point of view isn't as great as it was. I've gone on the record, and I will again. I'm not ashamed or sort of shy to say it. I do think that some galleries, and this is not all by any means, and I don't have experience of a lot of galleries, but some galleries I don't think really, do much to justify their percentage they take, which is very often, it's a basic 50%, and very often it goes beyond that. And I don't really necessarily think that they work quite hard enough to justify that. I don't necessarily think that they get fully behind you as an artist. They don't, promote you as much as perhaps they should. And this is born out of my own personal experience. I used to work with a number of galleries. I don't really anymore, in part because I think I've reached a sort of level critical mass whereby I'm established enough that I think that the market people know who I am, and they do come to me and to buy my work directly, which is fine. But the galleries I was working with, I think that some of them were great, some of them were fine, others were really not. I'm rambling, I know, but I'm trying to be a little bit measured about this, because I don't want to badmouth everybody, because quite frankly it's not deserved.
No, of course not.
But some are really dreadful, and I hear it from other artists as well. They're just not pulling their weight, and some galleries are getting you to pay for your own production, your own catalogues, and pay for your own private views, and it's like, come on guys, what does that say to you as an artist? It says we don't actually back you. And what's that going to do to you as to your creative process? It's not going to help, is it? Very often they'll dictate terms about what it is that they want you to paint as well. And I think this was the problem for me, is that I said to you before, I was doing a lot of landscape work out of art school, and portrait side of stuff was something that I've always enjoyed, but it was something that I brought more into my practice. And the more I brought it into my practice, the more reticent the galleries became, because they didn't really feel that it was, commercial in that sense. And they're right, it's not. But equally, I felt that it was, if they were genuinely interested in me as a painter, my journey, and evolving together, then they would want to see that they would recognise that was fundamental to me, and that they would want to, support that. And but they didn't, and so I was like, well, guys, this isn't going to work, because this is what I'm doing. I'm not going to paint pot boilers just to, to keep you guys happy, because ultimately I'm not going to be happy, and then you won't be happy. And I felt they were a little bit short-sighted about that. And this is the reality, okay? This is the reality for a lot of artists, is they have to do what the galleries want them to do. So my advice to you is, if you're going to look for a gallery, firstly, look very, very hard at their website, see the sort of work that they're promoting. Then if you can, get to the gallery and have a look at them, meet the people. And just, incognito, and just find out what the vibe is. And then if you still think that you like it, then, drop them an email and say, well, this is who I am, links to websites, that sort of thing, links to social media, really important. And if they like you, then they will, get in contact with you. And I think part of my problem is that actually very often, if they don't, they won't bother saying anything to you, which I think is just rude. Maybe call me a little bit naive. I mean, I don't actually think I am naive, but I think it's just bad manners. And I think it's something that's kind of peculiar to the arts. You wouldn't get it in many other industries. So that bothers me. And I had a little bit of I touched on that, shall we say, in one of my recent Instagram posts. So it's part of a wider malaise, I suppose, with with the art world in that sense. And I think it needs to change. I think if they are to remain relevant and to push through and survive, in light of the empowerment that artists have at their fingertips, literally at their fingertips with the internet, I think they need to cross their T's and dot their I's properly.
Now, I have noticed that galleries have been tending to exhibit unorthodox materials or work which is produced with found objects or kind of upcycling work, as opposed to drawing and painting, which I found quite difficult to be exhibited. And I imagine that's not just a North Wales problem, or not problem, but North Wales situation then. So what has been your experience with that type of kind of perspective on fine arts currently?
Okay, well, I think first of all I should put in a sort of a disclaimer here, which is that I have a very young family, and I'm not getting to exhibitions as much as I would like and as much as I used to. That being said, I still get around, and I think keep my sort of ear to the ground and have a reasonable overview of what's going on. And certainly my experience in London, which is where I live, is that it's a similar situation, that, and perhaps it's a sort of pan-national phenomenon as well. And I actually mooted this, and I alluded to this on a recent Instagram post about what I consider to be the lack of, I called it figurative art, but I think what I really meant was representational art, painting in particular, in the sort of the upper end, upper top end, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to sort of be hierarchical about it, but sort of the expensive end of the art market. And it does seem to me that there isn't a huge amount of representational painting happening there. I mean, as I said, in my practice occupies what I'd call the middle ground, which is I'm neither, as a painter, I'm neither realistic, I'm neither photorealistic, nor am I abstract. I'm definitely somewhere in between. There is abstraction in my work, but it is still representational. And from my perspective, there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of that being either shown or indeed talked about or championed. And people came back to me saying, well, actually, they think that there is. Looking at people like Hockney and Peter Doig and people like that. But I mean, I consider Peter Doig to be a relatively abstract artist. Yeah. And as far as Hockney is concerned, I don't think of Hockney's work as particularly painterly. There's a lot of narrative, and obviously he's pan disciplinarian. He uses iPads as well, and that's fine. But no, my experience is just that. So I am, as I mentioned earlier, the president of the Royal Institute of Oil Painters, and certainly within the society part of the art world, of course, there is a lot of representational work being shown. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about stuff being shown at White Cube, at Flowers, and places like that. There are some, but not very much. I'm not saying it should predominate. I don't think anything should predominate, but I don't think it's being represented in equal part as things, relatively conceptual work, or as you say, found objects, or even paint, but used in a very, very, very abstract way. And I think that's a shame. Pure and simple. I'm a figurative or representational painter, and I'd like my work, certainly, because this isn't pure altruism. I want my work to be part of that conversation, but I want painting to be part of the wider conversation. And I do not understand why it's not being championed and discussed. In fact, it seems to be slightly eschewed from what I can see. And I just don't quite understand that. And maybe I am a bit simple. I don't know, but I think I may be missing the point.
Has this been a topic of conversation that you've broached as part of your experience as a selector on a panel? Have you had these conversations regarding the considerations you make for exhibitions and for curations?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it depends what panel I'm sitting on. But for example, I'm using the Royal Institute of Oil Painters as an example. You know, I've chaired that selection panel for the last few years during my tenure as president, and I don't want to get too much into that. But you know, panels are panels, right? You know, ultimately your work is being judged and selected or not, and there's no escaping that. Okay, people are going to not get selected and think they should, and vice versa. You know, it happens, right? But I'm very, very insistent, and the people that are on the panel with me are also of a like mind, that it should be all work should be considered. It's not about your likes or dislikes as a painter. It's about the quality development. What do we think is the best example of work coming through, whether it's photorealism or, you know, pure abstraction or everything in between. Mm. And though that has to be consistent, you know, otherwise you get a sort of cliqueiness or a sort of particular sort of plein air element that's sort of predominating or whatever it is. And I'm sure that plenty of people who are watching this who have had work selected for the, or if any of you have your work submitted for the Royal Institute of Oil Painters or any of those societies who've either been selected or not, probably think, well, that's not what I saw. Because I think a lot of people still think that certainly the Royal Institute of Oil Painters is very, very traditional. And indeed, I think it is relatively traditional, but that's something that, certainly under my tenure as president, I wanted to sort of just move us away from pure tradition, have a slightly more varied approach to what we do and what we show, that's based on, you know, what we consider to be good painting. Now, again, there are plenty of other people that are going to say, well, you know, ultimately that's entirely subjective, but you know, I think that you can see when something is well considered and well put together, and when something isn't as well done.
I suppose the other thing I was wondering is that, sorry, just a moment, just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
No worries. Oh, it's because I was rambling, probably.
No, it was great. I really appreciate these answers. I'm just, this is all going to be edited out, this part.
No, leave it in. All part of the process.
Elevator music just running through.
Yeah.
Thought process is going on. What was I just thinking is...
just little images, little cogs turning.
Yeah, that's what it'll be.
There must be a meme for that somewhere you can stick on.
That's, there we go. You've jogged my memory. Thank you. The other factor to this is because of how the internet uses algorithms to kind of generate interest for certain avenues, and that's become slightly performative in my view. I could be wrong, but I feel as though artists need to do, you know, a bit of performance in order to demonstrate their work and otherwise remain unseen. How would you like to see, or how would you recommend artists get their work seen? What do you think works for artists currently in order to have their work actually just seen by an audience?
Are you talking about Instagram?
Talking about at all, really, because I suppose with there being a difficulty being accepted into galleries, which I'm only just starting, but I've experienced certain barriers that I didn't anticipate. And then with Instagram and Facebook and all the different social media platforms, there seem to be similar barriers, even though they are different parameters to those.
Okay, this is a really, really relevant, prescient topic, and it's something that we're all experiencing at the moment. So I would have said, 2 years ago, Instagram is an absolutely amazing platform for getting your work seen. It is a visual platform. You put your work on and you build up your following relatively quickly, and then it exponentially grows from there. Obviously, as you well know, and as I suspect much of your audience will know, I don't want to sort of use the word algorithms particularly, but the algorithm has changed. Not least because I don't really know what an algorithm is, but everyone seems to talk about algorithms. It has changed, and I think that posts aren't being seen that were being seen. They're not being given as much oxygen on Instagram. Now, I don't know why they've done that, but it definitely has happened. And interestingly, I was reading a post today, not that long before I came on here with you, about ways to maximize your exposure on Instagram. And it was actually it was a post from the guy who set up the artist support pledge. And this guy called Artist basically set up a page called Artist Support Pledge, and he posted today about how to get your work seen again. And things like what you can do for artists is, if you're looking at their work, you can comment on it, and that will increase, in Instagram's estimation, its visibility, and then they will show it more. You can share it. So practical steps, you can like it rather than just looking at it, scrolling past. If you actually, like the work, or think that it's worthy of your attention, then do something physical, share, comment, like, and then that will snowball its exposure. And very often a post that would have, just reached, say, 50 people, with the appropriate intervention from just a number of people, it could reach 500. And then you can extrapolate from there. So that's that side of things. So I would say that it's still very worth it for artists to use Instagram. I don't use Facebook. I used to. I don't anymore. I use Twitter. But in terms of, sort of real-time interaction with people, Twitter's not great. You don't get the same volume of people looking at your work. However, I have had some quite significant interactions through Twitter. I'd say it's not as visual a platform, but the sort of more corporate side of my practice, the people who are looking at my work for, say, the sort of social aspects that I was talking about before, the medical side of things, they would notice it and then they would contact me. So I'd say that Twitter is worth it as well, although it's not as overtly and obviously visual. As far as the galleries are concerned, I think you've just got to do the same things that you ever did before, which is, probably have a website if possible. It's useful. A very developed and consistent social media practice that galleries can look at if you contact them, and contact them, as I said before, politely, but what's the word I'm looking for? Where you're assertively as well, because you don't want to be playing sort of second fiddle to them the whole time. There needs to be a reciprocity there. You don't want to go in like a sheep going into a cage of wolves. It's not the one. And just build up that way. But the reality is, it's hard, and it takes, as you say, a lot to jog people's attention. And there is, I think you're right, Simon, a move towards sort of, I don't like to use the word sensationalism because that's been bandied around since the 90s, but things are going to get seen quickly, big red things, will sort of catch people's attention. And you feel that the sort of slightly more nuanced, subtler stuff may not get the same exposure. But you as an artist, I think it's imperative that you produce the work that nourishes you, because ultimately that's all you're going to be left with at the end of the day. When all said and done on your deathbeds, what did I do? Did I do something because I felt it and lived it, or did I do something because that's what I thought people wanted? And I know that that's not practically very helpful. And I know that's not going to necessarily, pay your mortgage or your rent, but I do think that it's, wherever possible, I do think you can have it both ways. I do think you can be, be respected and successful as a painter or as an artist, but also do things with integrity. It's just, we are in the middle of a pandemic of, sort of sensationalism within art, certainly on social media. I'm sure that if I were to get up in front of the camera and do a little dance, put a hat on backwards or something, I'd probably get more likes. But would I feel good about it? Probably not.
Well, it made me wonder as well, because if I can ask you more about your work a little, it's because you mentioned, big red thing to get people's attention. There is that rule of, if you pop red onto a painting, that will attract the eye. Anything that's high contrast attracts the eye, the light and dark against each other. Are there anything else which, or any specific, excuse me, rules like that, which are just specific insights that you've learned whilst painting, that you could share with the audience? Because there are certain things that people just aren't aware of, such as things having a tint of blue as they recede into the background. And
I was aware of that.
No, really. Well, if you look at a mountainscape, really far away, they'll be tinted blue, or the lightest part of a clear blue sky is the lower part, which you assume it would be the higher part for some reason, but it's actually lower. There's a scientific explanation to do with the molecules of water lower in
Refraction.
the yeah,
Refraction.
exactly. But it was an artist observation, I believe, earlier than the actual scientific proof of that. But so that's those things which are born out of study and observation. Is there anything that you can share that you know of which are observational insights that you've gleaned from your experience?
Yeah. So what I'm about to do is the reverse of what you're asking me, just to be super awkward. So I don't want to belittle or sort of be flippant about anything really. But the main observation I have, and I'm a simple fellow, I'm not academic about what I do at all, as I wasn't trained, right? Because I wasn't doing that last. Is that the looking and the observation is the fundamental element to what you do, certainly to what I do. And assumptions and suppositions and scientific formulae are just those, and they don't necessarily equate to the reality in the moment as I see it. So because something should be a certain way according to what somebody once said doesn't mean it is in that moment when I'm looking at it. Because eyes are supposed to, quote unquote, be halfway up ahead doesn't mean they are. Otherwise, if we paint people with eyes up halfway up the head, we're all going to look the same, aren't we? Things like that. So just trusting what you see, being brutally honest about that, for me would be the sagest bit of advice that I could give, and hugely, massively reductive, massively simplistic. But again, that's what I try to do in my own practice, is be simple, just simplify things into its base terms. And if you can do that, you can then blink yourself and cut away the extraneous stuff that gets into your head and starts you down a different path, which is one of, as I say, assumption and sort of pigeonholing and working in parameters that other people think should be there, when actually that's not the reality of what it is you're seeing. Yes, certainly strong colors like reds stick out, stand out, but so what? That's great if it's there. Or if you definitely want to get something seen, then you're going to stick a big red thing on your head. That's fine, do that. So I'm being, as you can tell, sort of almost deliberately flippant, but I think I'm doing that because that's how I am with myself. Okay, in my own practice, I am very, very rigorous about things like that. I said I'm not academic, but I am rigorous about looking, and I'm not. I'm not a photorealist painter, but it's still, and I'm relatively abstract in the way I put paint on, but it's still predicated on rigorous observation. Draftsmanship, drawing is fundamental. I'm not talking about getting a pencil or a pen out and drawing on my canvas or with one little brush and then doing a big painting on top of it. I'm talking about that one brush for the whole thing, just blocking in, but distances, judgment of distance and relationships is, for me, drawing is that. So I am rigorous, but there are things that I consider to be diversionary and things that are important, and other people's rules and suppositions, they can keep them, that's fine. Another thing like you mustn't paint a head larger than life size. I've heard that a few times. Why not? Someone said it once.
Yeah. No, my philosophy on this channel is usually you learn the rules and then you break them, because you're free to break them once you're aware of what they are. But it's if you paint without...
I'm aware of them, because I'm a painter, and although I said I'm not academic in that sense, I still, I'm interested in art, and I know what the rules are. But put it this way, I wouldn't do well in, the Florence Academy. It wouldn't work for me. In fact, they wouldn't let me in, full stop. So they wouldn't have me. But yeah, no, you've got to earn your stripes. I get that. And that, I think what I'm saying is that the observation and the draftsmanship is the earning of the stripes. You can't really, I don't think that truly great abstract painting comes from anything other than acute observation and really good draftsmanship. And the same can be said for painting that isn't abstract, I think.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion.
Is part of your process creating thumbnails of compositions, or how do you decide? No, do you go straight onto the canvas?
Straight on. Yeah, I am, as I said, a simple fellow. I'm also an incredibly impatient painter and an incredibly impatient person. And I just don't get it. There's no preparation. It's just, right, I'm going to paint that. I'm going to paint you. You look interesting. Get here. Bang. And there's I work on a huge scale. I work on a tiny scale. The process is the same for me. It's one brush, generally one brush for the whole process, one big brush relative to the size I'm working on. And I will look and I will make judgments about distance, whatever, and I will do it.
That's great to know, because there are students who I've met who struggled with the idea of having to have this building block process of starting at a certain place and ending up with a painting and having to justify the final result, as opposed to saying my natural process is to paint and to figure it out on the canvas. And does that mean that you don't really use a sketchbook much, or do you have a sketchbook for different? No, that's interesting.
So I went through art school. You can see it written on my face, can't you? I mean, I don't get it. And I'm not saying, guys, please, I know I'm coming across as either incredibly stupid or incredibly arrogant, probably a bit of both. I'm not. Maybe I'm a bit stupid. I just don't get it. I don't understand sketchbooks. That's fine. I'm not saying they're bad. Brilliant. You want to use a sketchbook? Use a sketchbook. Do whatever makes you happy. I've never used one. I don't really understand why you should. But you were told all sorts of things at art school. Certainly at Glasgow, we were told sketchbooks is the way forward because they were still drawing and painting. Later on, I wasn't, because that wasn't really what we were doing. But I never got it, and I never did it. I tried to, but there was never any real sort of intensity or honesty to it. I didn't really know what to do. I ended up just putting my shopping list on there. But no, for me, it's a very immediate and simple process. It's identifying that. For me, that's the hardest thing, actually, Simon, is what is it that I want to paint? Who, what, how? Not how. I know how I want to do it, roughly, but what it is that motivates me. And that doesn't happen very often. That's the problem. But once I have that, then I will move, heaven and earth to make it happen. And once it does happen, I've got that person in my studio, or I've got this project set up, I'll pursue it relentlessly, and it'll be, it's dinner time. I'm painting now.
Do you have a specific palette that you work from, or do you have preferred colors?
Yeah. So I use, and again, the caveat for everybody out there, this is just my colors, not right, not wrong, just born out of what works for me at the moment. Okay. So relatively simple palette. And I use, do you want to know the colors?
Please. Yeah.
Yeah. So titanium white, lemon yellow, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, burnt umber, and lately cobalt or cerulean blue will make my palette as well. And I do any painting from those. It doesn't matter whether it's a landscape or a portrait, whatever. Those I find are the colors that the fewest colors available to me to mix all of the other colors I can see in the world around me. So what that means is that it keeps it simple. I know where I am with my colors. I'm forced to mix, and I think that makes my understanding of color better. I mean, I don't understand in the sort of academic sense. I don't have tables and charts with color charts. I've never got that myself. Fine. I just mix and realize that that's about right, or that's not good, and then you just learn by rote. You learn from your mistakes, blood, sweat, and tears. And yeah, and I'm not saying that it'll be the same palette in 10 years' time, 2 years' time. Who knows? I might have a eureka moment and something else comes in, and somebody watching this might say, well, how do you get to this? I don't think you can. Fine. I think I can get most colors that I want within reason. And that's what works for me now.
So it's sort of 2 reds, 2 blues, a brown, a yellow, and a white. Am I right in thinking?
If you say so, yeah. I haven't considered it like that, but yes, absolutely, that's exactly what it is.
I was going through my head.
You've got a warm blue and a cool blue. It's like, I don't. Just those are the colours that I find work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm being reductive, obviously, but yeah, certainly the reds. in particular. The cadmium red would be a warm red. The alizarin gives me the pinker, bluer, cooler reds. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not academic. It's not, some sort of model that I'm using. It's just what allows me to do what it is I want to try to do.
How long has it been that you've had those narrowed down into your palette? Has it evolved since art school, or is it something that you figured out a while before?
I would say towards the end of art school, I was using that mainly. It used to be even smaller palette. I used not to have the cobalt or cerulean blue on there. And actually, I used not to have the alizarin crimson on there as well. But I found that there was a deficit in the sort of the pinky areas. And with the blues, I couldn't get the sort of the greeny intense blues that I wanted to from the ultramarine base. So it was even simpler.
That's really nice. I like knowing people's palettes. It's a very interesting way of figuring out how to describe the world. And
yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. That's just the filter and the lens through which I see the world at this moment in time.
It's a very personal thing. I think it's really nice to kind of know how people find that. But yeah, there's specific questions that I was asked by my art mentor outside of university, and I ask every guest if I have the opportunity. And one of those is, what do you like and what don't you like about your own artwork?
What do I like? Okay, let's start with what I don't like. I could probably say more about that. I don't like firstly, I don't like the fact that it's at this moment in time mainly heads. I want to diversify my practice and be more, environmental portraiture, figures in environments, that sort of thing, which has just a little bit more of a narrative element to it, but not sort of overly narrative to the point that it takes the sort of the importance away from the narrative within the face, because I think that says a lot as well. So that would be one of the things I don't particularly like. What else don't I like? I would like I'd like it to be even messier. It's pretty messy, but I'd like it to be even riskier, even more organic. And I'm sort of constantly trying to make it messy, if that makes sense. People always say, aren't you worried with paint really thick, like it's going to turn to mud? And I'm like, well, no, Christ, I actually really want mud. Mud is actually quite hard to achieve if you're trying to keep things clean, And it's that sort of balance between having visceral, muddy, grimy nastiness and then something really punchy that sort of puts it in its place, So the production of mud is something that I would like to be more adept at. No, it sounds a bit absurd, but it's true. Things I like. The other thing I don't like is the lack within portraiture, the lack of diversity, I suppose. Actually, in my own practice, included in that, the lack of people willing to sort of paint things that are not sort of immediately obvious. And in the tradition, the tradition of the prettiness in portraiture is. When I say diversity, I mean diversity of what is pretty and what isn't pretty. The fact that people seem to associate portraiture with a sort of prestige and putting people on pedestals. Where for me, it's absolutely not. It's about the human condition. It's about recording situations. It's recording circumstances and the reality of people's lives, and that's not often very pretty. I think it's a great chronicle of the times in which we live. So that's something I don't like and something I'd like to do more of. Hence the projects I was talking about earlier being, fundamental, I think. Things I do like paint. I like the fact that I like paint, that I use it, that I want to use it. Yeah. I like to be even riskier with it. I like that as an opportunity. I like the fact that as much as I've enjoyed being president of the Royal Institute of Oil Painters, I'm looking forward to not being, because that'll give me more headspace and more physical time to play with paint. And I like the people that it allows me to meet. I like the fact that I can get up in the morning and do something that I care about. I like that. I think that is extremely privileged. I'm very privileged to be able to do that. So I like that.
That's lovely.
I like the people.
And the last question I'll ask is, what's the most beautiful thing you've seen today?
My 3-year-old son.
Oh, lovely. That's fantastic.
Although it was at 5 a.m.
That's
So bittersweet, I think.
And before we go, is there any social media where you'd like to, or anywhere that you'd like to direct the audience to go and support your work, or go and check out and see more of what you do?
Yeah, cool. Social media wise, my Instagram, I think, would be a good port of call, at Tim Benson Art. And for Twitter as well, it's at Tim Benson Art. My website, I think, is quite interesting, because it's got obviously examples of what I do now, but also historical archive of exhibitions and video interviews and things like that, which give you an insight into the wider practice rather than just the paintings. That's it really.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you being a guest. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.
No, the pleasure's been mine. Really enjoyed it.
Okay, that is the episode done. I love that conversation with Tim, and I have reached out to him about featuring on my new podcast that I co-host with Richard K. Blades, and Tim has agreed to be a guest on that podcast as well. That'll be launching very soon. I'll announce that on this channel. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.